Hello, everybody, and welcome back to tracking our local shifting real estate market here in southern New Jersey, Burlington, Camden, Gloucester counties, 900,000 and below. This week, we're jumping into two things. One, obviously, we're going to do our stats as we do every week, but two, I want to talk about appraisals. I had a situation happen just recently with a transaction that threw us all for a big loop for something called Tidewater in a VA appraisal, which happens very rarely. But I've started talking to some more agents, and appraisal shortfalls are on the rise. So we're going to do a little deep conversation into appraisals in general, how they're different from kind of different loan types, what are the pros and cons from a buyer and a seller perspective, and then what was this situation with this Tidewater thing that we had to deal with. So this week, one of the things that we're noticing just in our stats is that we have been absolutely flatlined with our total active listings, or meaning the listings available to purchase. I like our ratio of new listings to pending to closed. I like that we had 260 new, only 221 pending, and only 181 closed. What's not factored into there are some of the properties that are active under contract, meaning that they have accepted an offer, but they haven't gotten through those 3 days of attorney review yet. And so they're kind of missing from these numbers, which is why you may see the total active listings staying the same, even though you would see a discrepancy of 260 new and 181 off. Why isn't it going up by that amount? And it's because it's not factoring in some of those. Okay. Our expired, withdrawn, and cancels hovering at 55. It's a little tricky for me. Even from all the data last year, it was sort of hard to find a rhyme or reason for the expired, withdrawn, and canceled listings. Expired as one category, I think you could figure out because most people would do them like based on a start of the month or an end of the month or midway through the month or something like that. But sometimes they're just 6 months to the day, whatever it is. Withdrawn and canceled listings, that can happen for any number of reasons. You could have a seller that's actively looking to sell their property, but they lose their job. So it's like, well, you could still sell your house, but where are you going to go? If you don't have a job at the moment, you can't get a mortgage for your next house. And so you may have to cancel or withdraw your listing, not because of any fault of the market or not getting a buyer or anything like that. It could have just been a personal situation. So those are a little tricky to predict, but it is just good to know how many are we getting some spiking weeks for any certain reasons and get some information from those. Okay. Price reductions continue to hover around 100. We've been there for, within a handful of listings for the last 4 weeks. That's not surprising. The one that is surprising, though, is our average and median days on market have really come down. I would attribute this to a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines, anticipating these rate drops, starting to get into the market now, and starting to take advantage of some of those early small percentage reductions of the interest rate before they really start coming down and the frenzy starts to happen again. So, but it will say it finally, for the first time this year, took us out of this basically 335 median list price and bumped us back up to 340. So we were at 340 for basically 7 months at the end of last year. We took a little lull at the end of December, January, now first part of February, but now it's coming kind of right back up to that 340 mark. And again, if we continue to see these total active listings as low as they are, I'm going to expect to see that number continue to stay steady around 340 and then probably increase. Again, one of my predictions at the very beginning of this year was I think that median list price for the purposes of what we're pulling here is going to get over 350 at some point this year. That's just my prediction for the market as a whole. So let's talk a little bit about appraisals, because I think from the data this week, there's not a lot that I'm taking in other than it's the market's speeding up and it's going to start getting a little expensive and we're still at low inventory. That's kind of the best summary I can take out of here. Let's talk about appraisals here for a second. And I'm not going to change my screen or go into a whole nother tab or anything like that. I'm just going to kind of stay here with you and we're just going to chat this through. Appraisals. What is an appraisal, first off? Well, an appraisal is basically just a way for the bank or the lender to make sure, hey, we are giving you a loan based on your income. That's the thing a lot of people screw up about a mortgage, is that a mortgage isn't a loan on a house or a loan for a house. Now, that's generally what you use to pay with getting a mortgage. But a mortgage is a loan based on your income and your credit, income, and assets and your financial situation. They are willing to lend you a certain amount of money that correlates to a certain monthly payment per month. Now, the kicker with a mortgage is that it is collateralized against a home, meaning that if you stop paying your mortgage, the bank or whoever's holding your note is going to say, hey, I need to recoup my money, so I'm going to sell your house and I'm going to get back the loan amount that I lent you in the first place. So that's where it comes in. So why are we talking about that? Because when you go to buy a house, you have to have the home appraised, meaning the mortgage company is going to send somebody out, an appraiser, and they are going to run comps, and they are supposed to be a third party, neutral, objective point of value for the bank's risk management. Anytime you are buying a property and you're going to be using a conventional loan, there's one set of standards that they're going to use. Now, it's conventional, and that's generally the easiest from the appraisal guidelines from condition aspects of your home, right? You can't just get in a mortgage on anything. They have to make sure the home is at least habitable and not unsafe or safe. Yeah, it needs to be safe and habitable. What if you get an FHA loan, though? Well, an FHA loan is backed by the federal government, and they have some stricter standards from an appraisal regarding the condition. So, a perfect example, a lot of times when you have a conventional home and you have a front door jam and it's starting to get a little bit of peeling paint, as they normally do, conventional generally doesn't raise any alarms or issues with that. But FHA, because it's the federal government, because of lead-based paint legislature and all these different things, they will require you to, hey, you need to scrape or remove the existing chipping paint, and it needs to be repainted, and it needs to be sealed and everything like that. So just little things. And sometimes when you're offering, that's one of the concerns of the listing agent or the seller is, are we going to get this punch list from the buyer's mortgage company about all these little things that we have to do just to pass their appraiser's condition threshold? And so all terms being equal, most of the time a seller's going to take a conventional offer over an FHA. But that's not the only loan type. You then have VA loans. Now, VA loans, again, backed by the federal government and specifically for military. And so there are more rules and regulations around that. And so there are more checks and balances. Well, the checks and balances are for the condition as well, but they're also for the financial aspect of the transaction. And it comes to determining value. Now, talking about this one situation we had, and it's called Tidewater. And it has nothing to do with Tidewater. I actually have no idea why it's called that. But basically, Tidewater is this. When a veteran buys a home, the government wants to make sure that they're not getting ripped off or they're not getting a bad deal, which is fair. And so if there's ever a situation in which a contract gets sent to the VA appraiser for them to do a review and they come out and they do a site inspection of the property, they come back and they're running their appraisal report and they say, hey, you know what? Before we send this out fully, we are going to give the realtors an opportunity to help us determine value, because they are the boots on the ground people. They are the ones who are the closest proximity to the daily sales and to the neighborhoods and the trends and things like that. So they should have a good idea of what these homes should be worth. And so for this particular transaction, and I'm going to give you kind of the numbers that we were using because it's what happened. We got under contract for this property at $390,000. Okay. Now, we already had what was called a $10,000 seller concession built in, meaning that we were going to get $10,000 against our closing costs, and the seller was going to walk away with $380 instead of $390. It's just a common metric we use in transactions to help buyers reduce their closing costs. Okay, so effectively, for the point of this transaction, the contract price was $390. Now, we were close, and the appraiser called Tidewater. And so everything stops for a second. We got a couple days to run comps, just like if we were doing a comparative property, a market analysis. When we sit down for a seller's house and we explain what their home's worth, we did the same thing. We were allowed to choose, I think it was up to 4 comps. We chose 3, and we chose comps that we felt were the best indication of supporting that $390,000 price that we had on the contract. So we sent them over. We believed, and me and the listing agent both agreed, like, these are the best ones we're going to use to justify value. So we sent it over. Now, the problem is when this appraiser, and we reviewed where he was from, he wasn't from the area in which we were buying this house. He wasn't even from the same state that we were buying this house. And you and I both know that your neighborhood has a lot of little quirks about it that may make it more attractive or less attractive than even right across the street, right? There are just these little differences. And what we were banking on was this house had a lot of those intangible benefits that if you knew the area, you understood why it was going for the price it was. But after issuing Tidewater, after sending our comparables, this appraiser unfortunately appraised the home at $357,000. So we're at $390 with the seller expecting to walk away with $380. And instead of getting $380, they're now going to get $357. So that's a big issue, right? This was an older seller who all the money they had in the world was basically wrapped up in the equity of this home. And they are retiring after this. And this equity is all they're going to have to live off of to buy their next home and all to live off of. This was devastating. This was a $23,000 loss that they're going to take. It was almost a $33,000 loss when you take it all the way up to contract price if you're doing the math that way. And so we had to stop the transaction for a second because we either are going to force the sellers to take a $23,000 haircut, which they're not forced to do, or the buyer could come to closing with $23,000 extra, $33,000 if we're going to take it all the way up to that $390 mark. And so nobody wanted this, right? And the listing agent, he tried his best, but he was very upset about the situation because we agreed, and I agreed with him. I said, I agree with everything you're saying here. This appraiser really did us wrong. He's not valuing this property the way that all of us believe this was. And we had to stop and ask a question for a second. And this is part of the real estate transaction, is that not everything goes according to plan, but we have to figure out and stop and remove the negotiation fatigue that you're going to get, and also the emotions from the situation. And we stopped and we asked two questions. First question was, hey, buyers, do you still want to buy this house? Like, forget about the numbers for a second. Do you still want this house? And the buyers unequivocally were like, yes, house has everything we want. It's where we want to be. It gives us the opportunities to do what we want to do. Commute. I was like, all right, good enough. So, a buyer, you still want to buy this house? And seller, do you still want to sell this house to these buyers? They're like, yeah, you guys have been great so far. Everything's been working out well. We really like the terms of our first contract and everything. And so we said, well, what do we do? Once Tidewater's issued, we can't go back and amend that appraisal. We can't. It's the VA. They are at an arm's length from everybody. Even the president, of the lending branch who we were going through to get this, he called the appraiser, and the appraiser's like, you know exactly the same that I do. We can't touch this. This is the value. It is what it is at this point. And so this deal was dead if we were going to continue with the VA loan. Now, Tidewater is only a VA loan thing. It's a specifically there to protect veterans using VA loans. So we stopped for a second and we said, okay, we can kill this deal. We can sign releases. Everybody's going to go back. They're going to list their property for a third time. They're going to lose on their new construction property again. This buyer will be going on to another transaction because this one, unfortunately, fizzled out, and they've already gotten out of their home in a different state, and they're living with family here, 2 hours away, and it's just causing everybody stress. So we said, well, what else can we do? And so we started to think about, well, buyer, there are 3 loan types, and the VA appraisal is the most strict of the appraisers. So we had the president of the lending institution talk to his appraisal team and just say, like, hey, here's a situation we want to run by the appraisal group, and just understand if there's going to be a hard line in the sand or if there is any room with this. And if we believe that your ability to review this property, because you know the area, because you understand those intangible benefits way better than what this VA appraiser did, do we think we'd be able to get them that original contract value? And they all agreed. Yeah, we all agreed. The buyers, the sellers, myself, this listing agent, the admins, the appraisers all said that original contract price you guys had was fine. It was great. That's right where this property should be selling in this area. And so we were able to quickly get everybody on board. We're flipping the loan type from a VA loan to an FHA loan. So it's no longer a zero money down loan, but it is a 3.5% loan. So now they have to bring 3.5% to closing. We're still getting that first $10,000 concession, and then we were able to negotiate. And we used it as a combo of, hey, since we're switching loans and keeping this deal together, and also the fact that we still need to negotiate some of the home inspection repairs, they said, give us another $10,000 and we'll make this work. So we were able to flip out of VA, flip into FHA. We can still make the transaction go. We don't have to change the closing date even. We're still going to close in, I think, 9 days, 10 days or something like that. So all that to be said, appraisals are a difficult milestone in the real estate transaction. They are not something to be trifled with. This is why you can't just go to a $300,000 home and offer $1 million on it and expect to get a mortgage for $1 million. The home's only worth $300,000. The lending institution is just simply not going to give you more money than what they deem it's worth. But just because you get one appraisal that's a little bit low doesn't mean there aren't ways to navigate it. And so the other way that you navigate these things, instead of switching loan types, because that was a very peculiar situation which we were able to overcome, the other option is you pre-negotiate appraisal shortfalls. And so this is where I kind of want to leave you today. And this is what we do when we offer on a property to pre-negotiate appraisal shortfalls. And here's how we do it. We add language to the offer that says something like this: buyer will be responsible for up to $10,000 of an appraisal gap if applicable. Right? And that's buyer will be responsible for up to $10,000 for an appraisal shortfall if applicable, or to cover an appraisal gap if applicable. So here's what happens. Let's say we're under contract for a $350,000 house, right? Let's just use $350 for easy numbers' sake. And the home only appraises at $345. Okay. Well, if we were to have agreed upon those terms, the buyer would bring an additional $5,000 to closing on top of their already existing down payment and closing costs. And what this is considered is a temporary negative equity position in the home, meaning that, I'm buying this home at $350, but it is really only worth $345. So for a small period of time, until I'm able to pay the principal down, or I'm able to work these things out, I may actually have negative equity in the property. Now, that would be if you're like zero money down, but there's kind of a same shakeout, conventional or FHA, if you just kind of talk about it the right way. If the home appraises at $340, right? $350 contract price, $340 is now what the appraised value is. Well, we would bring $10,000 to closing. But what happens if the home only appraises for $330? Well, we're on the hook for 10, and that would bring us from $350 to $340. But you're saying that the appraised value is only $330, and so there's another $10,000 gap that has to be overcome, and you overcome it one of two ways. Either the buyer brings more money to closing, cash, to then compensate the seller so they walk away with the same proceeds, or the seller agrees to walk away with less profit from the transaction. You can do it all on the seller side. You can do it all on the buyer side. The buyer and seller can agree to split that difference somehow, right? And you may say, hey, as a buyer, I'm already bringing 10,000. I'll bring another 2,000, seller, if you bring 8,000. So I'm paying 12, you're losing 8, and we still make it work. Okay, we could probably work that out. It might be 5 and 5. It might be just 10 and 10. You can work it out however the math suits you and suits your transaction. But there's a fourth scenario that could happen, and it's that nobody agrees. The buyer doesn't agree to bring any more money. The seller doesn't agree to take any less in profit. And at that point, that deal's dead. The deal's dead because the buyer is not required to bring more funds than they have to. And the mortgage company has determined their value, and they're only willing to lend up to a certain price. And so if you come to say, like, well, what the buyer's bringing and what the lender's providing does not equal the contract price, and the seller doesn't agree to that reduction, well, it's a dead deal. Now, the buyer, you'd get your escrow deposit back in that scenario, unless you acted in bad faith or they could prove that. But most of the time, you're going to get your full escrow deposit back. And the only money you'll be out is basically probably the money you spent on the home inspection, and you've wasted maybe 2 to 3 weeks. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this week. But I really wanted to bring up appraisals because this is something that we've been seeing more of it, especially in this market where prices have been on the rise. Buyers are getting desperate. They're overbidding on these properties, and they're running into situations where they might have bid a little too high. So anyway, if you have any questions on everything that we talked about from appraisals, I know it can be a little confusing, but just know there are many options to navigate this stuff, and it does depend on your loan type going in and what you want to pre-negotiate in order to avoid or at least reduce the chance that some of these situations are going to happen. All right, have a good week. See you in week 8 of February. Bye, y'all.